On today's episode, we're discussing friend or foe, how to identify and manage potentially dangerous people. Well, guys, welcome back to Survival Dispatch News. You guys are really knocking it out of the park with your engagement, your comments, your topic suggestions, which leads us to today's subject of identifying threats, how to tell the good guys from the bad guys so that you can increase your survival odds basically wherever you are. Now, we're going to jump right into this discussion in just a minute, but I want to remind you guys of a couple of things real quick. First, at the time of the original broadcast of this episode today, we've got a huge Survival Dispatch giveaway going on, over $25,000 worth of products. You definitely want to hop on over to survivaldispatch.com after watching this episode, get your entry in on that. And secondly, we are posting a link to Survival Dispatch Insider in today's video description so that you can have access to the content that's not available publicly here on our YouTube channel and on our other mainstream channels as well. Lots of great exclusive content out there. All right, let's get right to it with today's topic. Back to help us make sense of this, our good friend and self-defense subject matter expert and author of 21st Century Minuteman. If you don't have that book, you need to get it. I'll tell you where you can get it in just a moment. Countless survival-oriented articles, Sal De Janeiro. What's up, Sal?
Thanks for having me back, Denny.
You betcha. And of course, guys, we'll have links to anything. What we're talking about today is a very important topic. Sal's written a lot of information, articles. There are a lot of references, a lot of valuable information in his book, 21st Century Minuteman. We will have links to those articles, that book in today's description. Certainly, Sal, a lot to think about when you're trying to tell the difference between a friend or a foe. It's really, there's so many little cues and things we can look for. And really, in order to discuss this properly, you and I talked about into really breaking it down into several different scenarios: public, on the street, and at home. And I'm laughing because you and I had a discussion previously about your experience in Baltimore, Maryland, and what a freak show that place was. You just got to elaborate on that for me while we're taping this, so that our viewers can get in on this discussion about Baltimore.
Sure. So I've been in pretty much all of the large cities in the United States. I've spent a lot of time for work in Baltimore. There's just something about that city that people on the street are exceptionally aggressive. It is a freak show beyond words. You know, if people have seen shows like The Wire, the show Homicide from back in the 90s, both very good shows, actually, and both absolutely right on with their portrayal of that city. Both of those shows are actually based on the writing of a particular journalist who spent a long time in the 90s on the streets, documenting what law enforcement does. So the city has always been plagued with issues, particularly regarding narcotics. You know, at one time a few years ago, I remember one study estimated that on any given day there are 60,000 heroin addicts on the streets of downtown Baltimore,
Holy
actually in
cow.
city proper on any given day. So, you know, it's that
60,000?
60,000 heroin addicts within proper Baltimore. So it's not just downtown, I guess, spreading into the, areas
Wow.
around it. But I mean, that's a staggering number. You know,
That
and it's just a city that's plagued with absolute mismanagement for decades, and this is the result. So many of these things we're going to talk about, not only have I done a lot of research on these things, it's always been sort of a passion of mine. Had I to do it over, I would have studied criminal psychology, had I to do it all over again. But beyond that, most of this I've seen firsthand, these kind of things we're going to discuss, and being able to recognize possible danger and give it a wide berth is absolutely an imperative part of your survival and your preparedness in this world.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of us who think about, well, I can tell the difference between a good guy and a bad guy with one little subtle glance. But so many things have changed through the years. Acceptable way of dressing, appearances, even 20 years ago, someone who would be, a perfectly normal person walking down the street, normal in quotes, 20 years ago would have been, oh man, that guy's got to be a thug, he's wearing a hoodie, it's warm, it's whatever, tattoos, this and that. And here I am, got sporting tattoos and so on. So, things have really changed, haven't they, through the years? So we can't really, in my opinion, base our judgments on what we would have based them on even, 15, 20 years ago. And, I do think you did a great job kind of breaking this down, this outline. We're talking about, how to identify those potential threats in public, on the street, and at home. Let's jump right into the public aspect of this, if you would, Sal, and just kind of lead us through how to tell friend from foe in public. What do we look for? Obviously, we're visually looking for appearances and behaviors as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So my thinking on this was to break it down into categories that make sense. Again, we could spend hours upon hours talking about each of these things individually, but this should give people a good overall sense of what they should be looking for when we're dealing with people in public. And again, visit a big city like Baltimore or some of the other cities that have bad crime. And if you spend enough time on the streets of those cities, you're going to see all of these things come into play. You will absolutely see it. And you learn to recognize this stuff. And of course, if you can recognize it and avoid it, that is far better than having to deal with it if things turn violent, right?
We talk about that a lot. If you can avoid going those places, avoid those areas. I hate traveling through large metropolitan areas, and I will absolutely avoid that at all costs if I possibly can. Unfortunately, because of the careers and the things that we do have to travel to some of these larger metropolitan areas and be exposed to that. But yeah, number one, that's a real good point. If you don't got to go there, don't go there. You won't have to worry about identifying friend from foe. But really, you still do. You still need to have, I think, those abilities, right? Regardless of where you are.
Absolutely. And you have to have the abilities to deal with it because certain things you simply cannot avoid. I can tell you that, in past years, as I've gotten older and have a family, etc., I am not adventurous when it comes to traveling and going to bad places. But to be honest, when I was younger, I would. If I was in a new city, I wanted to see the city. And if that meant what, I've been through, Compton and South Central in LA, I've been through the questionable areas in Baltimore because I wanted to see it. And
Oh
I
boy.
did that. And I wouldn't advise that, but it's just it was a curiosity I wanted to see. And
Yeah.
I did, So again, many of these behaviors you will see. So I'll run through these and really when it comes to recognizing potentially dangerous behavior on the streets, it's probably going to fall into one of these categories. So here we go. To begin with, consider when you see individuals who are acting nervous, and we've kind of touched on the acting nervous bit before in other discussions, where we discussed, for example, even in terrorist acts that have transpired, before things kick off, those guys will be profusely sweating. They'll be nervously looking around, no matter how chill they try to stay. So acting nervous, sweating out of the ordinary is always a bad sign. Another one that is really easy to see if you're paying attention, and that's the crux, if you're paying attention, because we've seen video after video of surveillance videos of people not picking up on this at all because they're so preoccupied with their phone or whatever they're doing. And that is people acting erratic. Okay, bizarre behavior. And just, do a YouTube search, John Correa at Active Self-Protection. That's a great resource. He always reviews these bizarre things that you see happen. What you will see is either a mental breakdown of some kind transpiring, or I remind people, Narcotics are often at
Yep.
play, and especially if we're dealing with people who are high on things like synthetic bath salts, you will see very violent and erratic behavior. So if
Hmm.
you see people on the street, kicking around trash cans, having a conversation with people who aren't even there, again, visit Baltimore, you see it everywhere you go.
Oh yeah.
You're seeing either mental episode or drugs in play, and a huge proportion of homeless people are mentally ill. Vast majority of them are not violent, but some are. Okay, but a big proportion are mentally ill. So whenever you see erratic behavior, you want to give that a wide berth. You want to stay away from it. Cross the
Yeah.
street to stay away from it. You don't want to walk right past it. You will
Mhm.
see things even as extreme as what's called excited delirium. That is
Hmm.
a mental state that people go into, particularly associated with, again, synthetic narcotics like bath salts. And they will strip themselves naked because part of the syndrome they go through when they're on that drug is they feel hot. And, they'll get
Yeah.
naked and do all kinds of crazy stuff. What also comes along with that is sometimes almost inhuman, almost superhuman strength. And Denny, you've probably seen these kind of incidents. It takes 6 police officers to restrain a guy
Yep.
who's, stripped himself naked and acting
Yep.
crazy.
Yeah.
So this can be very, very dangerous. The thing is, though, there's always body language that gives the tell, and people will just flat out be oblivious to it because they're busy on their phone or they're just not paying attention. If you see this kind of stuff, walk the other way, go to the
Yeah.
other side of the street, whatever it is you want to avoid that. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It certainly does. Even avoid eye contact. I would say as well. I add to that because
Hmm.
often eye contact invites that further interaction and so on. So yeah, look away, keep going, avoid that 100%. Back to the naked bath salts guy. Reminds me of my law enforcement days. It's a lot more difficult to subdue a naked person because there's no clothing to grab
And they're
onto.
sweaty. Yeah, and it's
You
nasty and
know,
difficult to do.
so
Yep.
naked people are definitely not popular with with law enforcement for a lot of
No,
reasons. But
no,
yeah,
absolutely.
it all kind of goes back to our self-awareness, isn't it, Sal? And being aware of your environment. And get your nose out of your phone while you're
Hmm.
walking down the street, and put your head on a swivel. And be that paranoid person. I'm just going to say it. Be that person. Look around because at one time it might pay off for you to really pay attention. So,
Hmm.
besides behavioral indications, what about physical indications? I mean, should we talk about clothing, for instance, or other things?
Yeah, absolutely. Pertaining to clothing, let's go back to things we've discussed before concerning unseasonal dress. So, heavy clothing during warm weather, that's always a bad sign. Now, that is a very classic, typical symptom of mental illness, such as schizophrenia. A lot of
Mm.
times they just don't react to heat the way people in a sound mental state do. So, that's a big part of it. Again, everybody who's ever been in urban environments has probably seen homeless people when it's 90 degrees out, they're wearing heavy coats. However, if you see,
Oh yeah.
younger, relatively healthy looking males walking into an establishment wearing heavy clothes, that's always a bad sign. Pertaining to tattoos, and you can probably speak well to this, Denny, since you have a background in law enforcement. Tattoos in and of themselves is not necessarily nefarious, obviously. Millions of people have tattoos. However, tattoos on the neck and on the hands in particular are very often associated with criminality in general. So that's where you want to be cautious when you see that. Tattooing on the neck, very often it's gang insignia and that sort of thing. And again, we're making generalizations. I realize that. Possibly 9 out of 10 guys with a tattoo on the neck may be harmless, but generally, there's a reason that's associated in law enforcement circles with criminality. You want to be cautious there when you see that kind of tattooing.
Yeah, in my experience, I have found that even with folks that have tattoos that creep up the neck or sleeves down the arms, an indicator to me, at least in the past, was if those tattoos stopped at where your collar would stop, where your sleeve would stop, or stop where your shirt collar would stop, would for the most part indicate folks that were responsible working people that had to cover those up to go to work, for instance. But tattoos, neck tattoos, even facial tattoos,
Mhm.
are very, very common today. And from a law enforcement standpoint, a lot of things have changed since I went through the academy a long, long time ago. But we actually were shown tattoos that were indicators of different gangs and things. And there are really a lot of online resources. I mean, our viewers can jump on and Google that and find all sorts of information on how to identify people's gang affiliations through tattoos. And I would actually recommend that our viewers do that and do some research on your own, because
Certainly.
especially certain gangs, MS-13, for instance, are extremely proud of their affiliation and often will have a billboard across their forehead indicating who they're affiliated with,
Mhm.
as well. And, the big heavy clothing. Why would you wear big heavy clothing if you were not mentally ill? Well, you're hiding something. You're hiding a weapon. Maybe that's where you want to stash your stuff that you're going to steal. You want to hide your identity with a hoodie when it's warm and there's no reason to be wearing one, obviously. And in today's pandemic, quote unquote, atmosphere, it is so much more common to see people wearing a face mask, in walking down the street by themselves. Don't ask me why. I'm not one of those folks, but could possibly be because they're trying to also hide their identity as well. So on the street, when I see those folks, I keep my eyes open, but I try to avoid those confrontations, because that's 99% success
Yeah,
rate when you can do
no
that. We
question.
can just avoid that confrontation alone. And we talked about clothing, we talked about tattoos and body language, and then we can even take that body language a step further. If someone has their eyes locked on you and approaching you, targeting you, so to speak, that's a pretty good indicator that they're going to engage with you somehow, in my opinion. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to be
Am I
cognizant
right?
of, certainly, you want to be cognizant of anybody in the vicinity that is paying too much attention to you. If it's somebody you don't know, why are they looking
Yeah.
at you from across the street, from down the sidewalk? And then certainly if they move to intercept you, this is where you have to be particularly cautious, right? Because there's a reason they're going to be closing that distance. And again, avoidance is the primary tactic we want to go to. If it means moving across the street or ducking in somewhere that's very crowded, to avoid the interaction, that's better. Sometimes you can't. The other thing of note is when somebody approaches you. So let's say, you're on a typical urban sidewalk. Sometimes it's easier said than done. Avoid it, right? There might be heavy traffic. You can't just cross the street. So now when people approach you, which unfortunately in an urban environment, sometimes you simply cannot escape the interaction. Most of the time, it's going to be relatively harmless. It's usually street people asking for money, that kind of thing. But this is where you need to be really cautious about what you observe in body language. So, just to touch on some things that we have seen routinely, as far as body language that criminal actors will portray when they're getting ready to do something nefarious. You'll see what's called target glancing, and that is basically as they try to approach, usually with some kind of conversation. Hey, do you have a time? Hey, do you have a dollar? This kind of thing. If they're looking around to see who else is in the environment, who's there to witness things, etc., that's a bad sign, right? So instead of
Yep.
just looking at you and
That's an
talking to
indicator
you,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, that's an indicator that something's coming. That's what's called target glancing. They're looking around to see what else is in the environment. Another very typical thing that we will see is no matter how good they get at this, and many times, most criminal actors who do violent things are repeat offenders who have, when they try to mug you, it's probably the 1000th time they've done this. It's unlikely that's the first time. But no matter how good they get at it, they're nervous when they're doing it. So there are certain cues you'll pick up on. One is what's called grooming. They'll play with facial hair. They'll rub their hair like as they're looking around. Hey man, do you have, the time? Can you give me this? Can you give me directions? Whatever it is. Look for that grooming pattern. They'll be touching themselves in a nervous sense, which is human behavior in general. If somebody's nervous at a board meeting at work, they might do the same kind of stuff. But this one, a criminal actor approaches, you want to look for that grooming. That's very important. And if you see that, it is absolutely imperative that you maintain space. You don't let them walk right up on you. You've got to hold space. And of course, that's the next category of discussion we can have here about how to manage that kind of criminal encroachment.
Yeah, and I want to kind of just interject here and speak to the fact that most criminals want a soft target. They want an easy target. They want somebody who is distracted, somebody who looks diminutive, that looks like they're not gonna fight back, somebody who's carrying a bag that can easily rip off them, whether it's a lady with a purse or a guy with a backpack over one shoulder, or a computer bag, or so, whatever. They want an easy target. They're not going to look for somebody that's got what I call command presence, that's walking down the road with their head on a swivel, that looks confident, with good posture and straight up, and so on. They don't want somebody that's going to fight back. They want an easy target, so they can get their money, get whatever they can get, and get out of there. All right, so let's jump into that. So what if you cannot avoid that contact? They're closing the distance. You've got to pass them. So there are things we can do, right?
Absolutely. So pay attention to the way they approach. Very often it's a single individual. What is particularly dangerous is if there's groups of individuals. One tactic that I've seen quite often transpire, you'll see this on surveillance footage all the time on streets, is if you have 2 or 3 individuals, as they approach, they'll fan out because they're looking to flank you, right? You want to avoid that. You want to absolutely stack them, which is just a common fighting tactic, whether it's with open hands or with weaponry. You want them stacked, right? You want to be at their flanks if you have more than one. So position yourself. A very good tactic for dealing with an aggressive single potential threat that approaches you. And I'll give credit to really the individual who has synthesized this whole method of teaching. What he refers to as managing unknown contacts is a firearms and self-defense instructor named Craig Douglas. He has a company called ShivWorks, and they teach primarily, integrated weapon stuff with hands, dealing with that, contact distance fight over guns, knives, etc. Now, he has synthesized what is really, again, a lot of these principles have been around for a long time, but Craig Douglas really synthesized this into a training block that he does in his own classes, and some other instructors teach it based on his content as well, called Managing Unknown Contacts. And this is where, when we run into that typical individual, they're going to try to close distance with us, usually through some kind of ruse. Do you have the time? Do you have $1? Can you tell me where to find whatever, right? They're trying to close distance. And if you pick up on these other indicators that this individual is potentially dangerous, you must manage that distance. One of the tactics he teaches, and again, I mean, I've put this to use in the real world, and it's quite effective, is you need to have initial verbalization with that. And when you deal with the criminal element, you don't want to be flat out rude and aggressive, right? You want to try to de-escalate and not incite violence. So at first, if that guy's getting uncomfortably close, it can be, hey man, can you hold right there? Yeah, wait right there, buddy. If he continues to encroach, that's where you have to become aggressive, giving the firm stop in a command voice, right? I like just stop or get back. Now, one thing I want to put in people's mind, especially if you're in an urban environment, almost everything is on video camera. Everything, right? People are either filming it with their phone or their surveillance cameras.
True.
So if something happens, you have to consider the legal aftermath, right?
Yeah.
So consider what you want coming out of your mouth if you're dealing with the criminal element. Do you want to say, I'm going to kill you, mother effer? That's probably a bad idea, right? But if you say stop or get back, those are two things the criminal will never say, because the criminal wants to close the distance, not make distance, right? So I love get back, just stop or get back, right? That is a command that makes it clear to everybody in the environment, you're the good guy. You want nothing to do with this. You're telling this guy to get back. Now, if he doesn't immediately break contact and he's still encroaching, what you must consider is the very common street tactic of somebody will take you by surprise from behind while you're preoccupied dealing with the guy in front of you. They do this all the time. So once again, Craig Douglas, he teaches an incredible, very useful tactic for dealing with that. So we need to maintain eyes on the guy who's the obvious threat, but what's behind us? Well, we can't just turn around and look behind us, because now we take eyes off of a guy who now might be actually close enough to sucker punch us, right? So an incredibly good tactic for dealing with this is think of a clock in your head, the face of a clock. If the bad actor is in the center of the clock, and let's say you're at 6 o'clock, you want to move in a circular pattern to about the 3 o'clock position or the 9 o'clock position. That way you're able to maintain visual on the known threat, but you're going to move yourself so that in your peripheral vision, you can now see what's behind you.
Okay.
And it's a genius tactic, because that way you can maintain visual, and you simply move again to his 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And now out of your peripheral or just a quick glance, you can see what's potentially behind you. So if you have a guy who encroaches on you, and if you get the sense, hey, this guy is trying to demand my attention, why is he doing that? Do that maneuver to 3 o'clock or to 9 o'clock. Now you can see what's behind you. And the other thing about that, I've done that for real twice. It absolutely throws a monkey wrench in the gears of their entire plan, because they do not know what they're seeing. Nobody has ever done that before. And all of a sudden,
they don't expect that, right?
What is this guy doing? He's maneuvering on me. What is he doing? And both times for real that I've done that, they immediately broke contact. They're like, bye.
So this guy's no longer an easy target.
Right. This guy knows something. He's setting himself up. They don't want anything to do with that typically. So fantastic tactic. I learned it from the teachings of Craig Douglas. I advise people look up his training. And again, I've done it twice for real, and the psychological impact it has on these guys when you do it is most often going to be enough for them to break contact.
I love that. So if there's that's one great takeaway from this. No, you don't take away anything from this discussion today. That technique sounds extremely valuable. And look, if I'm the bad guy, I don't want. I would throw him off. If I was the guy in the back trying to stick up and sucker punch or grab the bag, do the bad stuff, I'd be like, oh yeah. And that guy can identify me now, because he's changed his peripheral vision, and now he sees me as well. So no longer an easy target. And maybe that solves the problem. Yes. I want to just bring up this. Did you see the video recently? I can't remember where it was. I'll look it up. Of two guys that went into a small shop in an urban area dressed as construction workers. And one guy went in initially. He had a hard hat on. He had a reflective vest, and he had a clipboard. And he walked in and he said, I need you to sign this waiver. We're working outside. And the guy behind the counter, distracted by this waiver, that the guy in the construction helmet pulled out some mace or pepper spray or something, sprayed another guy in the shop. Well, the other guy rushed in, smashed the glass countertop. Maybe it was a jewelry store, I don't know, and grabbed a bunch of stuff and ran out. And boy, that caught that guy off guard, because he did not look like the bad guy. Right. Those were guys with nefarious intentions that put a lot of thought into what they were doing. And the businessman just immediately thought, well, I guess this is legit. He's staring at like, what, where, what exactly? And he's focusing on this. And so bad stuff can come in many forms out there, and it's not always easy to identify. And that's just something that came to mind. I just saw it the other day. I don't know if you saw it or not, Sal, but it's something to think about, because some criminals put a lot of thought into their nefarious dealings and put some planning, and can really catch us off guard. So talked about being in public.
Yeah.
Talked about being on the street. Really great. I love that circular technique, that clock technique, whatever we're going to call it. Fantastic takeaway. What about when you can't avoid situations where you cannot avoid? It might, maybe you're in your vehicle stopped at a stoplight, you can't go forward, you can't go back, or maybe you're at home. I think it's certainly worth discussing those types of scenarios also.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we can't avoid something, again, we come back to avoidance is absolutely the best medicine, but there may be times where you can't avoid things. Even on the street, it touches back to what you were talking about, being a hard target yourself. It makes a tremendous difference. I was one time approached by a guy who got very aggressive, ironically in Baltimore. So back to our discussion about Baltimore. So
I've never gone to
yeah,
Baltimore.
yeah, I know. And he came up to me and he's like, he's hitting me up for money. I said, I have nothing for you, and he got nasty. So back then, I went through my tactical pen phase. So that was one of the tools I would carry when I can't be armed for
Okay.
real. Now it would be OC spray, but you can do essentially the
Yeah.
same thing with either. So when he got pushy, I pulled that pen out of my pocket and just held it. I didn't held it up or anything. It just came out of my pocket and was in my hand. And he said, and I said to him, I
Yeah.
said, I can't help you. That dude turned around and walked off like that. Okay. Because the dynamic
Yeah.
now has just changed. Because what he realizes at that point, I don't know if he knows what a
Yeah.
tactical pen is. It's basically just a very solid pen that you can hit somebody really hard with if you have to, right?
Yeah.
But the body language
Yeah.
told him this is going to be a fight. This is not what he's looking for, right? He's looking for easy prey, an easy
Yeah.
target. Somebody's just going to give it up. He's not looking to get into a fight. A strategy, you could do the same thing with OC spray very effectively. I like to do what one of my mentors, a very good firearms instructor named John Murphy, he calls it the rattlesnake. That's if you flip the top lid of the OC spray, so it sounds like a
Uh-huh.
rattlesnake. Tick, tick, tick.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
do the same thing. I've only done it with the tactical pen for real, never with OC. But if it
Yeah.
happened today where I'm carrying OC, I pull it out and do the tick, tick, tick and say, I
Yep.
said I can't help you. So again,
Yeah.
it totally now changes the dynamic. You are not looking at a felony conviction of aggravated assault because you don't have a gun
Yeah.
in your hand. It's a
Yeah.
pen or OC spray. But again, you're at the point where he's not doing anything overtly aggressive, but you get the sense it's coming, right? So sometimes having
Yeah.
a less lethal tool on you you can bring to bear very quickly can short circuit it before it turns aggressive.
Yeah. So for our viewers, if you know what we're talking about, on most good quality commercial pepper sprays, so C sprays, there is a little protective cap that is spring loaded kind of down, and you literally have to slide your thumb underneath it to be able to activate the spray. And that's that little cap that Sal's talking about, that kind of sticks up, that will make that noise. And speaking of pepper spray, Sal, I've kind of gone to gel versus spray myself these days, because based on my experience, what I've personally experienced and seen out there and through law enforcement, if you got a little wind blowing back, that the gel you tend to not get as much residual effect, and you
Mhm.
almost always get a little bit of residual effect from pepper spray, from OC spray. And folks, we're not talking about, OC spray is not meant to do what a concealed firearm can what a firearm can do. It's just a non-lethal type of self-defense, and you should think about those options, because you're not always going to be able to carry your concealed carry revolver or pistol on you where you go, and you need to have those other
Mhm.
options. And there's a ton of options out there, and I'm a big fan of having that option of pepper spray. I've also done a lot of training with tasers as well. I'm also a certified taser instructor on top of that. But there are certain circumstances where I would use this, wouldn't use that, and so on. For instance, I wouldn't necessarily, if I'm at home, I'm armed.
Right.
I'm not going to tase somebody or pepper spray somebody in my house, or sitting, if I feel like my life is in danger, serious physical injury, or my life is in danger. Again, it goes back to that: is this a right situation? when you're by 12 people, if you're indicted for on a murder or manslaughter charge, what are those people going to think? Can you articulate that you were in fear of your life? We're not lawyers here, but this is my personal opinion. And so I like having options. There are certain times when I won't use an option and so on. So this vehicle situation is very interesting, especially with the protests that are going on sometimes, Sal, and we get caught in that. If we get caught in that and we can't go forward, we can't go back, and things, may become violent. I'm going off on a side road. I don't want to go too far down that road, but there are situations where we do need to be able to identify a threat when we're sitting in our vehicle. And sometimes there's not a whole lot we can do, but it's definitely a time when you need to be able to defend yourself in some form or fashion. But what about, at home, you get that knock in there, that noise in the middle of the night on the front porch, the back porch. I definitely think we need to talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you just jogged my memory talking about the door at home. There's another article I will send you to go along with this that I did a number of years ago,
Okay.
specifically about managing things at the door. And I'll send that for your viewers, because what we have seen a lot pertaining to home invasion is very often they will get you to open the door through some kind of ruse. Again, it's some kind of trick. They send, for example, a good-looking young girl up to pretend she's selling something, or, a pest service. Oh, we're treating, people in your neighborhood, pest control service, any of these kind of things. Oh, we're trimming trees, whatever. And then there's 4 or 5 guys right up next to the door waiting to rush the door when you open it. So again, we can be accused of being paranoid, but it doesn't change the fact that this has transpired numerous times for real in the real world. So you need to be exceedingly careful about opening the door. And quite frankly, my policy is this: if I don't know the person, the door doesn't open. I talk to them through the door. And that's what I've encouraged my family to do. Okay, you have a hardened door, using large screws to get all the way into the door frame. Keep one of those door braces on the door set up at home, even when you're home, even during the day. That's what I do, right? Because they're going to have to really bash on that door for a long time, and that's what I want. So if I am not expecting somebody and I get the doorbell and I look out the window, or, you could even set up the electronic intercom with the camera so you can see right through it, the Ring cameras, etc. If I don't know who this person is, I talk to them right through the door. I say, yeah, I can't help you. One of the great things about so many people working from home now post-COVID is you can always say, hey, I'm in a work meeting. Sorry, I can't talk right now. Okay. So I don't want to deal with those annoying
that might
people.
that might be a great deterrent, because they know you're on Zoom, and somebody comes up behind you, they're going to be visible, and all of a sudden they can be identified.
But the most
same with the Ring doorbells.
Absolutely.
Great tools.
They're great tools. So leverage these tools. But the most important principle here is that you talk through the door. You don't open the door. Because even if you're armed, even if you're wearing your gun, which I encourage home carry, again, people can accuse us of being paranoid all they want, but just look up video of home invasions and how quickly those things happen, right? So, with me, my policy is pants on in the morning, the gun is on. Again, unless I have to go to places where I can't, be legally carrying. But otherwise, I'm wearing a gun, even at home, because these things happen so fast, people don't realize that. So you want a hardened door that you keep locked all the time, even during the daytime when the family's home. And don't open the door if you don't know the people, because if they're going to get in, you want them to have to work for it and to spend time kicking down that door. And that's time you now have to prepare. You have time to get your loved ones into the safe room, whatever designated safe room you have in the house, and you've got time to be ready.
It's very easy to find those videos online, home invasion videos, and the guys, and it's you almost choreographed it beautifully, because when you see the people coming up, they're coming up on either side of the door. One guy might be in front, or they might all be kind of hiding to the side. You see the approach, and I tell my friends and my family, be paranoid, be judgmental, just be that way, because that might be what keeps you alive. So, this is, we're talking about normal times here. This stuff happens. But in my opinion, and yours as well, I'm quite sure, based on our previous conversations, these scenarios can change quite a bit in a collapse type of circumstances. By collapse, I mean things are not normal anymore. And can we just kind of go down that street, Sal, and talk about that?
Yeah, and certainly, your viewers are definitely heavily into the preparedness thing.
Mhm.
So, we can talk about this in a sense that if you talk to normal everyday people, they think again you're paranoid. I always tell people, paranoia means being afraid of something that's imaginary. There is absolutely nothing imaginary about home invasions, even during times of relative
Yeah.
stability, let alone during a collapse, right? So you can label it whatever you want if you want to stay naive about it, but there's nothing paranoid about worrying about something. Just a quick side note. More people are injured or die to violence in the home every year than to house fires. More, significantly more, many, many times more, actually. And in fact, I did an article citing these statistics from the CDC and other resources a number of years ago. I'd have to pull that up, but it's staggering the difference there in how many people actually die of house fires, because in our modern day and age, we have smoke alarms, we have fire extinguishers, etc. Now, what's interesting is nobody calls you paranoid for having smoke alarms and fire extinguishers in the home. In fact, most people would call you stupid if you don't have those things, right? Yet when you bring to their attention
True.
that,
That's right.
yeah, yet when you bring to their attention that you are far more likely to be injured by human interpersonal violence in your home. Now, granted, a lot of that factors in domestic things as well. A woman with an ex who gets violent, but still, okay, between home invasions, violent exes, etc., it's incredible. It was like 28 times as many people are injured through violence in the home than from house fires. Yet, if we talk about having the tools and mechanisms to defend the house from violence, people will call you paranoid. Well, I call that being foolish, right? Don't discount something
Yeah.
that is not only as likely, but it's far more likely. You have to have your plan in place to deal with violence, just like you have it to deal with fire. Okay, so with that said, so during times of collapse, right? So
Yeah.
there's two general categories we could put that collapse into. One of which is honestly not much different than what we saw during the 2020 Summer of Love, where blue cities like Indianapolis and Portland had a huge uptick in home invasions during all that craziness, right? So even
Yeah.
though society is relatively stable, you may be in an environment where things go, straight down the tubes. Think of Hurricane Katrina, right? The horrendous things that went on
Yeah.
in that city for a 2-week period. I don't think people realize 1,800 people died in New Orleans during Hurricane
Yeah.
Katrina, right? So you might have a relatively stable environment, but in your vicinity, maybe for a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever, basically there's a local collapse. In that regard, you're going to be dealing with criminal home invasion just on an unprecedented scale. So, what we may be dealing with is just more likely, but not necessarily that different than just home invasion that we're talking about in general. You are dealing with the possibility of large groups of armed men trying to burst through your door, and you have to have the action plan for that. In long-term collapse, that's where things will get more difficult. And again, I encourage people to read the books by what's his name? Farfel. I think that was the Argentinian guy, and Selko from the Balkans, like guys who lived through and then
Yeah.
document like real collapse, what really happens.
Yeah.
During long-term collapse, that's where it's more likely that you're going to see these nefarious ploys that people will play to try to get entrance into your home. A woman with a couple of little kids, can you help us? We're hungry,
Yep.
this kind of thing. And again, you have to think in terms of, is that individual who looks relatively helpless, who you might be inclined to help, are they setting you up for something, right? Are they
Yeah.
setting you up for either just getting you to open that door so that there can be a rush through the door by
Yep.
adversaries you don't see? Or are they even setting you up in terms of just trying to gather intelligence? If
Yeah.
you're very generous, give them a bunch of food and stuff, and they take that back to whatever criminal actors they're working with and say, oh yeah, that house is well equipped, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
unfortunately, you have to, it's a fine balance of, I don't want to be flat out rude. I want to be helpful, right?
Yeah.
But I also don't want to tip my hand to say, hey, I'm well stocked now during a collapse where people might be actually starving, going without food, which will make people who are
Yeah.
otherwise not violent violent and extremely
Yep.
volatile.
Oh yeah, when those survival instincts kick in, people will resort to violence. I'll just take a step back and remind our viewers, there are some things also you can do to not make your house or where you live an easy target. And you mentioned something really important, and that's reinforcing your doors. And I go back to the old idea of the big cross brace, and the doors of the fort, the old West forts, and they just bring that big bar down, and you could do things just as simple as that, front and back doors, and make sure your window. I tell my friends and family, don't leave your curtains open all the time, especially not at night, because that's when it's really easy not to be seen from the outside. You can look in and see what's going on. Is there somebody there? Are the things worth stealing? And things like that as well. So there are things you can do at home to make your home more secure and less of a target. And if the only takeaway from this portion of the discussion is, do not open that door, because even during some of the hurricanes and things down in New Orleans, there were people doing FEMA scams and walking around knocking on the door with a clipboard and a hard hat saying they were from FEMA and doing an inspection or whatever, and it turned out to be a nefarious type of situation as well.
To get in the door. And the one last thing I would say about the door is stay away from the actual physical door when you're dealing with unknowns on the other side of it. There was an incident just not long ago. A guy, he actually looked through his peephole and they shot him right through the peephole when they saw the shadow. They could so these are, the unfortunate things we have to consider. I like to talk through the door, but be well away from the door, off to the side of the door. And that way, if they hit it with a really hard blow, you don't want it bursting open onto you, right? So just things that unfortunately in our world we have to consider.
Yeah, I'm be really interested in seeing if our viewers have had experienced these type of circumstances. So you guys, if you're watching, if this has happened, you let us know about what happened. What was the circumstance? Whether you were in public, on the street, at home, in your car. Have you had any close calls? Did something bad happen to you? How did you tell the difference between a friend and foe? So much to think about. We're just about out of time. Certainly a lot to think about when trying to tell the difference between a friend and a foe. Big thanks to you, Sal, for contributing to today's discussion. Really appreciate you. Of course, we'll put all these awesome links to the articles that Sal referred to in today's episode in the video description, as well as a link to Sal's book, The 21st Century Minuteman. Well worth the reading. Thanks a lot, guys, for watching. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Please remember to hit those buttons, like, subscribe, comment, and share, and keep those topic suggestions coming. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.